Fire still. All right, I'm going to call the meeting to order. If we could all stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. So I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. So first up, we have the public hearing for the proposed local law override the tax levy limit. Clerk, could you please read the notice?
Please take notice that the town board of the town of Cornwall will hold a public hearing on the 13th day of September 2022 at 7 o'clock p.m. at Town Hall, 183 Main Street.
Can't hear. Microphones.
Robert? Please take notice that the
Testing. No, you're just gonna have to project your voice a little bit more and no talking like that. There you go.
Please take notice that the town board of the town of Cornwall will hold a public hearing on the 13th day of September 2022 at 7 o'clock p.m. at Town Hall, 183 Main Street, Cornwall, New York, on the proposed local law of the year 2022 entitled A Local Law to Override the Tax Levy Limit Established in General Municipal Law 3C. The purpose of this local law is to override the limit on the amount of real property taxes that may be levied by the town and to allow the town to adopt a budget for the 2023 fiscal year that requires a real property tax levy in excess of the tax levy limit as defined by General Municipal Law 3C. A copy of the proposed local law is on file in the office of the town clerk and available for inspection by interested persons during town clerk's business hours. The town board will at the above date, time, and place hear all persons interested in the subject matter hereof. Persons may appear in person or by agent. All written communications addressed to the board must be received by the board at or prior to the public hearing.
Okay, so we're going to do something a little different tonight. Before we have public comment, I'm going to run through this for the public real quick. The board members all have copies of this, about exactly how it's going to run. So before I get started, I just want to make sure that the tax levy limit, the tax cap, doesn't mean that we actually are going to do so in the final budget. It just allows us to prepare a budget that will go over that. The town board will have any final say over whether or not we adopt a preliminary and then eventually a final budget going over the limit. But in order to do that, we need to go over the limit and pass a local law. So first slide, 2023 supervisor's budget proposal. responsible fiscal management and tax policy in the town of Cornwall. So, the final fiscal year 2022 Cornwall town budget was balanced with a lower tax levy using a one-time and unsustainable use of the town's savings accounts, which are called fund balance. We basically applied $2.76 million of the town's savings, reducing the levy. Next slide. So, for the past decade, the Cornwall town budget has relied on a tax levy to provide approximately 70% of all town expenses to maintain public services that residents expect. We cannot keep using fund balance in the way that we've done in FY22. We need to basically balance the budget on a sustainable recurring source of revenue to pay for ongoing operating expenses. We cannot rely on depleting our savings accounts or one-time budget gimmicks to pay for services the town needs. So in FY23, the town budget, we're going to restore the tax levy to a more normalized level of around 70% of expected expenditures in order to maintain the essential services. So, in order to restore the Cornwall town budget to a level which will allow us to maintain services, this is going to require us to go over the 2% tax cap. There is essentially no growth in tax levels from 2021. The only reason we need to consider this is because of the one-time tax cut in 2022. It reduced our tax levy below a level that is sufficient to pay for town services. So, the following slides that are coming up is going to illustrate some of these facts. Every number here comes directly from our audited financials and adopted town budgets. I've worked closely with town professionals and our auditors, so Pam and Jason here. And these are also, we've also reviewed the guidelines from the state controller to help develop this plan. So as you can see, our town expenditures have remained relatively stable. If you go back to 2017, what changed was how the town paid its operating costs in 2022. So if we go to the next slide here, okay. So as you can see, we've been relatively, stable here. We've had a compound annualized growth of roughly 2.5%. What you're going to see here is that you're going to see this. So this was FY21 right here, where we used roughly 1.05 million of fund balance, and the rest came from taxes. The 2022 preliminary budget, which actually had a public hearing, that was going to rely on roughly $1.34 million of fund balance, and that was the only budget last year that actually had a public hearing. But the actual adopted budget that got put through, we ended up doubling the amount of fund balance to roughly $2.76 million, and you can kind of see the decrease in the tax levy over here. Next slide. So the prior supervisor presented a normal budget at the public hearing that was funded by an appropriate level of taxes and fund balance. This preliminary budget was approved after a November 4th public hearing, but the final supervisor's budget did not have any public oversight or input. It was very different than the budget that was presented to the public and had a public hearing. So you can see here, this is going to show how much fund balance is being applied to the budget going back to 2017. You're going to kind of see what looks like a normal kind of growth. And then all of a sudden you're going to see, so this is what we did in 2021. This was the final approved budget. This is what was the 2022 preliminary budget that actually had a public hearing. And then this is the final adopted budget. And you can see the jump from the preliminary budget that had a public hearing to the final budget to using almost $2.76 million of fund balance to balance the budget and reduce the levy. So what I can say is that, look, we have never used more than 1.3 from our savings account to pay for essential services prior to what I would call essentially a surprise budget. Next slide. So as you can see, this is kind of the breakdown of how we pay for services in Cornwall. As you can see, it's pretty standard, 70% taxes, 25% revenue from other sources. That could be sales tax, that could be mortgage recording tax, other fees, other sources of revenue we get. This is how the 2022 preliminary budget that had the public hearing would have, paid for services. This is where we ended up with the final budget. You can see we kind of go from 71% taxes to 57%, and then using almost 23% of fund balance to balance the budget, or the town savings. Next slide. So, the FY22 final tax levy was approved in the final budget, and that relied on basically gutting the town's reserves and savings. Basically, our professionals, in working with Pam, who helped put together the numbers for the tax rate and the tax levy that we believe we're going to need for this year, they've made it clear to me that the current levy that we're going to be allowed for this year, without going over the cap, it's not going to be sufficient for basically paying for existing services. Next slide. Okay, so slide 15. Oh, sorry. Okay. So basically, we are proposing to bring the town back in line with our historical approach to budgeting and taxation. Town budget staff and myself, we believe that we can apply somewhere between 1.3 and 1.8 million of fund balance to the budget in FY23. But even that amount, that's not going to be enough because we're limited by fund balance percentages that we have to keep. Like we can't just take, all of the savings that we have aside and put it towards the budget. There's certain percentages. It's 10% roughly, but you want to be a little above 10% because if anything goes wrong, you need to be able to have a cushion in case you go into a recession or you have inflationary pressures or whatever. So if we go, next slide. Okay, so in order to fully pay for the existing town services, the town's financial team estimates that we need to restore the tax rate, tax levy, back to a normalized level whereby taxes pay for roughly 70 to 75% of annual expenses. For FY23, we believe that a tax rate of around 4.21 to 4.5%, that's where it's got to be. We're currently at 2.81%. That's what happened when we used the town's savings to reduce last year's levy. We brought it down to this amount, but that's not sustainable. And so the rates that we're going to be proposing for this year, they're essentially the same rates that we had in FY21, the final budget, and the preliminary budget that had the public hearing last year. Next slide. So you're going to see here, this is roughly annual revenue from taxes. So you're going to kind of see relatively stable. So this is what the taxes would have been, had we ended going with the final budget that had the public hearing on November 4th. But instead, the surprise budget yielded taxes of about this amount, only paying for 56.6% of the town's services. Next slide. So basically, these are just sort of some quick numbers that are important here. So the tax cap levy in 2021, that was 8.377 million. The tax cap levy in 2022 was 6.546 million. So basically from 2021 to 2022, we had a decrease in tax revenue by 1.831 million. The tax levy limit for 2023, we actually start the year off with last year's tax levy. So because our this amount right here, this is not enough to pay for town services. We basically need 8.2 to 8.5 million in order to keep the current level of town services. If we go below that, we're not going to be able to provide for any number of services that you guys have come to enjoy that are really important. Can we go to the next slide? Okay. So essentially, I think this chart kind of really shows it here. So this is what the tax rate was in 2021. We went down about 1.4% to 2.81% last year. What we're looking to do essentially for this year is go back to the normal. You can see the normal, right? go back to 4.21 to 4.5. And the reason why I say 4.5, we don't quite know how inflation is going to impact the expenditure side. So right now, we're still sort of building our budget. The tentative budget is going to be due to the town board by September 30th. So we're going to have a much better idea as to where we're going to land on that tax rate side of things. Next slide. Okay, so what happens if we don't bring the tax rates back to normal in FY23? Well, it's essentially cut 1.25 to 1.5 million from existing town services. Where do we get that from? It's basically going to be, It's going to be essentially, look, most of our spending comes from personnel, benefits, and contracted services. So what is that? That's, 300,000+ to New Windsor EMS to provide ambulance service. We might have to cut that. We'd have to take a sizable chunk from the highway department. It could be a $500,000 cut to the highway department. That's all staff. Sanitation. We might have to have you folks, instead of having sanitation pick up, you might have to go take it to an Orange County waste transfer station because we wouldn't be able to, provide for the staffing. We would have to cut public safety. So this would be police. This would be code enforcement. I mean, these are the big areas. These are the big expenditures. So recreation and senior services. No department would be spared. And of course, we'd have to go with the bigger departments because the bigger departments are funded the most. So that's essentially what happens if, we can't raise the tax levy and go through the tax cap. So I'm going to open this up to public comment now.
Hi, I'm Felicia Lecce from Mallard Avenue, and I just have a few things to say. I used to work for the government, so I know if you have something like a tax levy that you can apply for, you say you are going to apply and you might not use it. However, you've already said 2 times tonight that you are going to use it to do this. So that's number one. I was looking at the budget publications that came out or that are on the website, and no, there's a lot of things that I went through as far as expenses that I saw were extremely expensive from the year previous. I don't want to bore people with what they are, but if anyone wants to know, I'll tell you. But the one thing that jumps out at me is that, we need money, we need to do this. I want to know what kind of, deferences is KJ getting for things that should be coming into the town? And I also want to know why the supervisor's salary was increased by $45.4 thousand. So just some questions. There's some low-hanging fruit there that I think after looking at that, I'm pretty savvy in this financial stuff. So there's some low-hanging fruit there that I think some things were adjusted too high.
So
thank you.
first, the supervisor's salary was not increased by 44. That's a complete. I don't know where you got that from, but that was absolutely not. If that was a typo on a, but I'm absolutely not making $100,000 a year.
Publication that was for fiscal year 2022 from 1 to 12, and it says that it was adopted on November 17th, 2021.
I'm not making $100,000 a year, folks. So I can tell you that. In fact, it can't be that because actually at the beginning of the process that I believe we have to disclose and we have to vote on all of those salaries. So those are already set. I mean, I can't even be paid that amount of money. So that's obviously a typo.
Well, we need to fix it.
Yeah.
We need to fix that. Okay.
Yes.
Can I proceed?
Yes, of course,
Thank
Nancy.
you. Nancy Bryantown, Cornwall. What you didn't disclose is what's left in fund balances. Oftentimes budgets are balanced by taking from the fund balance to help the taxpayers. I do want to say that in case no one realizes it, we really are in a recession right now. The news tonight highlighted the fact that our food for every human being in this room is costing more than it has ever cost in the entire history of the United States of America, and there's no sign that it's going to be going down, okay? So at a time when we are heading into even more difficult financial times for all of the citizens in this community, to even suggest that we're going to raise the tax levy is pretty interesting to me, okay? I would take a guess that the town board approved the budget last year.
I
That
did not. I
wasn't
voted
a
against-
surprise,
I voted
okay?
against it, yeah.
This is my time to speak, thank you. Maybe this year, you might have chosen not to do certain projects that were extras, no matter how nice they were, okay? You're proposing every department will be impacted, every department will be cut, okay? Two things. First of all, back to the fact that we're in very difficult financial times, you are going to grossly impact so many people in this community that are struggling. And if anybody thinks people in this community are not struggling, you have your head under a rock, okay? You're going to go and eliminate all of these services that we have here. You will see property values plummet, okay? You have already said that we're going to see this tax increase. Shame on this board if they can't figure out how to keep our services stable, because the one department I didn't see impacted was the town board. Thank you.
Okay, next. Is there anybody else? Yes.
Mrs. May, I have one thing to say. Thank you, number one, at least having this meeting so that we would be informed, which is nice. Normally, the government is very poor, and it, not us, but the whole United States government is very poor at informing people. When is enough money enough? I remember when kids played on grass and dirt. They didn't need an $8 million, and I'm all for kids' sports, the whole deal. Don't need an $8 million thing. And then tell us that I'm not going to have sanitation and blah, 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 blah. It's not fair. Let's get some frugality. The whole country's in a mess. Well spoken. And I've had it. I mean, when I was going to move to Cornwall, that was 17 years ago, love Cornwall, love it. But they said, don't move to Cornwall, the taxes will kill you. So, and I'm a senior citizen, obviously, old and decrepit, but we can't do this, especially to senior citizens, because I got my September tax bill. It was up $300 for September.
That's school. Yeah, this has nothing to do.
I don't care what it has to do with. We have to start living as best we can with our means. No big projects that it would be nice to have a new swimming pool and this and that, the gazebo for the band, all that. Stop it. Give us the services we need. We have to have these services, of which they do a great job. The police, the highway department, they do a great job. I want to be able for them to maintain doing us a great job, but we don't need the electric wiring down the street of Cornwall underground. I work for the utility. It would be millions of dollars or whatever. Thank you all for your services, and I get it. It's a difficult job, but this is ridiculous that we're going to lose. We're going to lose, it's going to cost all this more money when this woman was absolutely correct. We are in inflation. The United States government is taking us down. Our own government is taking us down.
Sure. So let me just say something real quick. So the projects that we've done this year, the gazebo, that was paid for out of the town recreation fund. So whenever somebody builds a house, they contribute $2,000. It goes into the that had zero tax impact on you building that gazebo. That came from money that developers put into a rec fund when they built something in the town of Cornwall. As far as the pool, that's not even part of this. That's not even part of this discussion. The other projects that we've been doing this year, those will be paid for via American Recovery Project dollars, and that will have zero tax impact on you. So we're not talking about adding, just to keep the basic level of services we have. This is what we have to do. That's how much it costs. So, and if we don't go above the tax cap, we have to abide by state law, and we have to keep within that tax levy. And we do not have the reserves in order to make up that full $2.7 million. We do not have it. So, yes.
I'd just like to make a comment. So, just to get clarity to this whole thing, right? This is a lot of numbers and a lot of speak on fiscal year and things like that. Essentially what, you can break it down, make it real simple, right? So in 2021, right, we went to work, we worked 11 months out of the year, right? Worked 11 months, took a month off, and hung out, okay? And went down to Florida, okay? And we paid for that with our savings, okay? We take that vacation. In 2022, what we did was we only worked 9 months. Because you know what, we're like, screw it, I need a 3-month vacation, all right? And so we didn't have any money coming in for 2 months. And we went down to Florida and hung out, right? Didn't get a paycheck, and we paid for that vacation with our savings account, okay? So now here we are in 2023, and we're like, oh, wait a second. I got stuff I gotta pay for, you know, because I gotta work, right? And I gotta live. So we went back to work, and we worked for 11 months, right? And that's essentially what we're doing. We're going back to work, okay? In order to pay for our living expenses, we gotta work for it. Because we no longer have the savings because we blew it last year when we went on vacation, okay? So that's where we are. It's not that we are raising all of these extra expenses, which unfortunately there are going to be raising expenses because inflation is going to go up. But we got to pay for that somehow, right? Or we're going to lose the basic services. So that's what we have to think about. And I will also remind everyone that the reason that we are in this situation is because of the previous supervisor, and the fact that he raided the savings account so that the town could go on vacation. And now here we are in 2023, just like we predicted, just like I predicted when I stood up and challenged the budget last year. We're in that same boat. Okay, that's why we're here where we are. And this board, I want to thank them for their transparency and laying all of this out. Okay, and again, I'll remind everyone that the only person that didn't vote for that budget last year was your current town supervisor. Okay, so thank you.
Hi, James Jackson. So I remember that meeting last year. That I think was the third meeting I attended when Randazzo rammed that thing through, and is Dick here?
Right here.
There you are. Yeah. Thanks. Good. As I'm a Midwesterner, I'm a fiscally conservative Democrat. It was shameful. I thought. When I looked at the numbers and realized what happened, they stole from you. They stole from you. Now we're going to put it back right. This is unfortunate. I don't think it's going to be as painful. We're all hurting these days, I know. But it was, I couldn't believe when the woman next to me, whose name I do not remember, asked, why are you doing it? And the answer came back, I believe, from Helen at the time, that we were doing it because we had the authority to do it. It wasn't because it was the right thing to do. It wasn't because it was the smart thing for us to do long term. It was because short term, they were going to have some sort of, I don't even know about it. I don't know why they did it. Love to hear an explanation for why that money was taken. It didn't have to be done, and it bothered me for a year and a half since I saw that. So I have no problem with anybody, but I was like, why is this good little town undercutting its future? So that's my.
So I'm
Hi,
standing
it's
again.
my turn now. Thank you. Because you spoke, right? You stood.
I stood, okay, go right ahead.
But I raised my hand. That's the way we do it in a civilized society. Okay, so I think the demographic is old enough to understand maybe the old Popeye cartoons in Wimpy. The character Wimpy, I'll gladly pay you tomorrow for a hamburger today. I think that's kind of what we're dealing with. It's pretty much no more difficult than that to understand. I was at a village board work session last night, and I sat for 3+ hours listening to this board do a high wire act. I mean, our communities are just doing this
on a razor's edge to keep everybody, to keep the equilibrium. And we can't afford the luxury of being whipsawed the way that we're now being forced to do. There's no free lunch, as Wimpy showed, but I think it might be a good metric if the board could produce, I know it's before the final adoption of the budget, but if hypothetically nothing, if the original budget had stood, and you could follow the line, because as you said, it's always been a very stable rise that didn't blow anybody's heart valves. It just kind of kept us in our state of equilibrium. Now we're applying the paddles because we have to. And it would be interesting as a metric to see, if nothing had been done, if this potential tax increase would be less than that curve. It would be great if you could show, if nothing had happened and that curve was happening in that very gradual way, if what you're proposing needs to be done, and I think it probably does, if it actually isn't so bad after all, and that we ended up having our dessert first. Okay, last year we ended up having our dessert first, and now we have to pay for that dessert because we want dessert again this year. Thank you.
Yeah, so what I would just say about that is that we're basically, if you look at the one chart, we went from 4.21% in FY21 down to 2.8, a 1 year decrease budget gimmick of basically a $2.76 million tax cut that was only sustainable for 1 year. We want to bring the tax rate back to exactly what it was in FY21. That is all we're looking to do, so we can maintain services. We're not looking to add any increase in expenditures. We want to maintain services just the way they are. If you go back from, like a year from now, you'll go back, you're going to see that essentially what you would be paying is what you were paying in FY21. That is all we're looking to do, is to forget about this 1 year anomaly that we had. Yes, we had our dessert first. We can't keep eating dessert all the time, and we have to get back to exactly where we were on that, that chart that shows the tax rate of roughly, 4.21%. That's what we have to go back to this year. Is there anyone that hasn't spoken that would like to speak? No. Okay. Yeah.
I'll just mention a couple things. Number one, yes, there was an additional surplus that was added to the budget last year. And if that 1.3 million additional money that was added to the budget was wasted, that would be one thing. Every dollar of that went back into the pockets of the taxpayers. There were tax breaks, a couple hundred up to $1,000. It went every penny of that 1.3 million additional surplus that was put into the budget for this year, stayed in the pockets of the taxpayers. Everybody got it. Number one. Number two is, Josh, you know how much you've said we depleted the funds, we gutted the fund balances. Do you know what the fund balances are as of the end of 2021?
Yeah, actually we do.
Would you like me to look
What the fund balances on, that would apply to the 1.3 million that we
So I can go one by one through the funds and give the total fund balance and the amount.
just the total for those four categories, I think it was, that are affected. General, Park County, Highway.
So the four major funds, right? So General A, total fund balance at 12/31/21, $1,729,178. If you take off the appropriated amount for 2022 and the reserve for sand rings, it brings you down to available fund balance of $741,000. That is 21% of the following year's budget. The state comptroller recommends 20% or higher. General Fund B, total fund balance, $1,359,181. 2022 appropriated amount, $800,000, leaving available fund balance at 12/31/21 of $559,181. Highway, DA, total fund balance at 12/31/21, 205,086. Assigned or appropriated for 22, $30,000. Unassigned or available fund balance of 175,000. And the last one, DB, total fund balance of $1,564,620. Less the appropriated for 22, $975,000, bringing the available fund balance at 12/31/21 in the DB fund to $589,620.
So in total, those four categories, fund balance not appropriated to 2022 is how much?
Not appropriated.
Not appropriated.
So total fund balance you're asking. So I'm just gonna do the rough math in my head.
Yeah, I'll take
So,
that.
so. So Pam's in my ear telling me exactly what it is. It's $4.8 million, yeah, total between those four. Available, or unassigned.
Unassigned.
So 4.8 total fund balance. The available fund balance, assuming the appropriated in 22, again, just give me the opportunity to do math. $2.2 million.
2.2 million unappropriated into 2022.
It,
Right.
yes.
But then how much of that falls within our fund balance policy limits? Because we can't just, so that's 2.2 that is above, free and clear above the 10% limits that the town has.
So I'll give you the percentages.
Yeah.
All in one. So just to, so we have a perspective on the percentage. Town policies, 10%. Fiscal stress starts below 20% as far as the state comptroller is concerned. Okay, so I'll go through those at the end, at December 31st, 21, in the General Fund A, 20.91%, right on the line. General Fund B, 19.18%. DA, 43.49%, and DB, 25.6%.
Okay, so the bottom line, $2.2 million left over unappropriated at the end of 2021. Doesn't sound like we got it to finances or we depleted the reserve. So $2 million is not trump.
So, and of that $2 million they're saying is available, we're saying that the town can appropriate somewhere between 1.3 and 1.8, making sure that we leave proper amounts above.
Going forward, not.
Yes, going forward, so that we don't get ourselves in a situation where we're not able to pay for costs. So if we go into a recession and sales tax takes a hit, we're never going to have this, really awesome mortgage recording tax again. That was like once in a lifetime pandemic-induced, levels of dollars that we got into the town. We're also seeing inflation. So we can't just take the entire $2.2 million and put it. We believe that we should take the conservative approach and put somewhere between 1.3 and 1.8, leaving money in the fund balance so that we can appropriate some again next year, like we always do, and leaving a little bit of reserve in case we go into bad economic times. So I believe we're taking a conservative approach to use of fund balance. Yes.
Your comment was inappropriate, sir. So, Josh, for the county, for Cornwall, how much of the county sales tax comes back to Cornwall? Because it's not just the sales tax for our local businesses that the town gets. Doesn't the town get a percentage of the sales tax?
That's part of the other revenue sources that you see there, and so that
That's all budgeted for.
that's all budgeted for. That's already
revenue.
that's in the other revenue sources, and so so we've already been, I believe, overly optimistic, with at least for this year with the use of sales tax. We're lucky that it's somewhat worked out, but for next year, if we're headed into a recessionary environment, we cannot count on sales tax to be what it's been, over the past couple of years. But yes, that's already accounted for in that other sources number. Yes.
I'm just listening and thinking, if we're redlining our budget, what does that do for our bond rating as a municipality? And how does that affect our borrowing costs? Because above and beyond what you showed in your presentation are these hidden costs of having to actually, if there's an extenuating circumstance or something that happens in everyday life, in municipal life, if we're less than solid, we're not looked at as favorable. So we're redlining our budget.
That's it. Yeah. So actually,
so I think you're trying to restore it.
yeah. So I can actually talk to that. So when we were meeting with our municipal bond advisors, you know, our concern is if we have to borrow, what is it, more than a $1 million threshold, we have to have a ratings call. And our concern is that they're going to see this yo-yo effect. Bond rating firms don't like to see a yo-yo effect when it comes to the use of fund balance and sort of this, like, you know, tax rate dropping, because you know it sort of highlights that something is wrong, that you have fiscal, you know, and tax policy mismanagement. They don't like to see that. So if the town ever has to go, let's say we ever have to buy buy a property, or do a huge drainage project on Hasbrook, or, you know, if we ever have, you know, other projects that are going to come up, you know, we may have to pay higher amounts of, you know, of debt service because of, you know, of doing this. So generally, we want to build up our fund balances. So one, we have money to apply to projects, priority infrastructure projects, and two, so that our bond, you know, we want to get back to normal, because if we have to go to the market next year and borrow more than $1 million, we need them to see that we did the right thing and, you know, did a course correction and brought our tax rate back to what the historical levels were and used an appropriate amount of fund balance. That's what we have to do. Otherwise, I mean, doing anything else would be just simply reckless. Yes.
So how much do you think will be going over this tax levy? And what would that mean when you do go over? Will our taxes go up again?
So essentially, you know, right now you're at your, I don't know if you want to talk to that panel. Okay.
Right now, working on the budget right now, because our current rate is $2.81 per $1,000 of assessed value, okay? If we go back to the rate of 2021, which was $4.21 per $1,000, you're looking at sort of how the budget's getting fixed up now, with possibly like a $300 increase to a home assessed at $300,000.
So $300 overall?
Yes,
Okay.
over the 4 major funds.
So if,
Per year? For the whole year.
yeah, and so if you look at your taxes from FY21 and you compared it to what we want to bring it to, you're going to basically, it's going to basically be a wash.
Right. I think people are just, they're confusing school taxes. I know I just got my tax bill too, so I know it's a touchy subject. But the town and county taxes are different with this. So you're saying if we increase, we go over the cap, we try to get back to our
The cap is,
normal.
this is like kind of a formality
Yes.
for the law.
Right.
We're giving an amount that we
Right.
can be allowed to tax levy.
Right.
So now, for this year, it started out a lot lower also because of the 2021 levy.
Okay.
So that amount is 1.8 million, whatever it is we're gonna go over. That's not saying that, but
Right.
that's the tax rate, that's, you know, that levy that's gonna go over. So it comes back to that too. We're gonna go from the 281 that we currently had in this year
Right.
to 421 to 425.
Yeah, somewhere in
whatever.
that range.
So,
Yeah.
so approximately, I just want to make sure I'm getting this right. So approximately, with this increase to basically maintain or just get us back to the levels, we're talking about for our town and county taxes,
I would
approximately
say between
$300.
$300
$300 to
to
$400.
at $300,000.
A home assessed at $300,000.
That's given just, budget's not completely done, you know. it's
Yes,
not
exactly,
completely
but you're,
done,
no, you're
but
giving
just
me a
projection.
more, I think we can wrap our heads
Yeah.
around that a little bit better. because
Supposedly
people want
what
the
was
bottom
given
line.
back last year, so it was given back.
Right.
And so basically the board, you know, if the board decides to go through the tax cap, this will allow Pam and I to basically put out a tentative budget that's going to bring the town back to what it was in FY21. I mean, we're going to pay for services the way we paid for it in FY21, which is 70% taxes, you know, 25% other resources, 5% fund balance, and that's just where we're looking to bring it back to. But this doesn't obligate us to actually adopt a budget that goes over the cap. It just allows us to. But we need to have some certainty in putting the budget forward. In order for us to put a tentative budget out that brings us back to where it needs to be, we need to go through the cap. Otherwise, I've instructed Pam to we're going to basically have to put out a austerity budget if we don't go through the cap. That's what's going to happen.
No, I thank you. We had a good conversation this afternoon, and I really had a better understanding of our situation. I just want to say one thing. There's some people, it's not about dessert. There were some people that actually needed that money, and I get it. And then I know it brings us back to this. And it is our duty to actually make these adjustments so that we do continue services. But I really don't like the idea of dessert. I don't like the idea of hearing about vacations, because there was a lot of people who didn't take vacations in dessert and were struggling through this pandemic. And yes, this was a choice last year, and we'll deal with the reality, and I definitely agree with your recommendation.
Yes, ma'am.
Everybody needs security in their budget,
Yes.
especially senior citizens.
Mhm.
So please keep senior citizens in mind who really love their homes and don't want to move out of Cornwall.
No, and look, for my goal, the best way to ensure that we keep our tax rates stable is to try to bring on more commercial ratables. Hope that the county does more to build things that generate sales tax. Legoland has been a huge boon for us. So we need more stuff like that coming online, because that allows us to not have to go, back to residential property owners, which is where the bulk of revenue comes from in Cornwall.
Right, so I'm correct. Out of all the activities in the county, sales tax, we get 1/2 of 1%, right, of anything, Legoland, wineries, things
Yeah,
like
everything.
that.
So everything that gets generated, we get a piece based on our population.
The commons, yeah, right.
Oh yeah, the commons, Legoland, all of that. We get a piece of that.
But again,
Yes.
that's also budgeted on.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's budgeted
And you've
for.
done a good job with that.
She does that.
Oh, yeah, she does excellent work, no,
I don't think anyone here would say otherwise. I can tell you
it's a
that.
whole new language.
I've always waited for the opportunity to say it.
Yes. Oh, I know. Oh, beautiful.
Okay, so if there is no further public comment, I'm going to make a motion to close the public hearing.
Second?
Ms. Scott?
Yes.
Mr. McGinnis?
Yes.
Ms. Michael Rossi? Yes. Mr. Wojciechowski?
Yes. Okay, is there any public comment on any of the agenda items on the? Yes.
What is the vote that you're going to say to make this pertain to this local law business
We're actually going to do it later. It's in the special meeting.
later today?
Yes. Yeah, it's in the second part of the meeting. We're going to get through the rest of this agenda pretty quickly. All right. So first up, we have the proposed local law override the tax levy limit. I don't know if any of the board members have anything to add to that. We just kind of had a pretty lengthy discussion. So if there's nothing further to add, then I'm going to move on to the next agenda item. If that's okay with you. Okay. All right. So I don't have a lot to say about this. The Water Authority Exploratory Committee, and let me just sort of walk back. First, authority has negative connotations. So let me just, it's really a Water Service Exploratory Committee. And so let me just, essentially the mayor and I and the water superintendent had a discussion on this back in August, because they're trying to find better ways to run the water department, and they want to see how can the town be involved in that. The town has needs as well. We have different water districts that are not currently being taken care of by the village water department. We have lots of private lines. We have lots of aging infrastructure. If you notice what happened, what was it, yesterday with the Hudson Street water main break that caused us to close the senior center and the library. Just using that as an example, even though it's in the village. But 70% of the town's water infrastructure is maintained by the village water department and is in the town. So they actually maintain 70% of our water infrastructure. And so just to give yesterday as an example, they had a valve that was put in like 1896. And it hadn't been touched until then, and it broke, and they had to replace the whole thing. And so just, just using that as an example as, sort of the importance of this. And so the conversation the mayor and I and the water superintendent had was basically the water superintendent is proposing to put a basically exploratory committee together that would consist of a village trustee, village resident, the water superintendent. On the town side, it would be a town resident, a town board member. The 5 of them would meet for a couple of months. The goal would be to put forth recommendations for how we can work better together. I believe right now it is a ad hoc type committee that they're proposing, but I don't have any further details than what I just said. They met last night, they had a work session last night, and the village attorney was instructed to essentially send a letter to the town with exactly what they're requesting from us in a letter. That's going to come to us along with maybe a few other details. I should have that in the next week or so. That will come before the town board. We'll probably discuss it either next week or in October, and then the town board will decide how it wants to interact with the ad hoc committee, if it wants to participate. But that's where we're at, because there's been nothing that's decided. And again, the village has still. This is the village department. They run it, right? So we don't really have, the only thing we do is essentially, they have some water producing properties in the town that they pay taxes on, and then in exchange, town residents pay higher, water rates. So we have some of these things going back and forth. But look, whenever you have an issue with your water line in the town, and it's, one of the lines that the village happens to be in charge of, it's the village that comes and, repairs it. It's the village water department. So, and 70% of that infrastructure that the village is responsible for is in the town. So that's, I just wanted to,
Okay.
but there's nothing to act on right now.
All right, can
Yes.
I would like to ask council a couple questions. Can you define for us what exactly a water authority is? I have no paperwork in front of me, so I'm clueless as to what's going on. I know the village has a lot of infrastructure that they're repairing. I mean, they are collecting money. It kind of is their responsibility to be maintaining their infrastructure. So I just want to know, what is a water authority and what benefit would it be to our town to actually enter into something like this?
Water authority depends on the legislation that created it as to what its jurisdiction is and what duties it performs. For example, Dutchess County has the Dutchess County Water and Wastewater Authority that covers the entire county. Mm-hmm. There are water authorities that are formed just between a village and a town, or between two villages, or any combination of municipalities that have jurisdiction limited by the local laws or resolutions that were adopted by those municipalities to create it. I think it's important to understand, and I wasn't at the village board meeting last night. I did speak with their council, though, that there isn't really a proposition on the table to create any municipal entity to govern water service in the town and village of Cornwall at this time. All that's being discussed is ideas to make water service better, more efficient, less costly.
Do we need to strengthen the, we have an existing IMA, or do we not have an IMA in place?
We have IMAs between the water districts and the village as far as service and billing.
Yeah, so that's a potential way is either putting in place an IMA between the town and the village, water authorities, all these different levels of things. I don't even think we're like on step like 0.51 at this point.
We're nowhere near an IMA at this point. The village, in fact, is I believe, and like I said, I wasn't there last night, I'm calling it an exploratory committee where they would compare notes on what problems they're experiencing, what needs they have, what their costs are, and just come back to each board, the village and the town, with their respective ideas, and then, perhaps there'd be a meeting between the village board and the town board to kick it around more. But this is very, very preliminary.
Yeah, but I'm actually thinking, shouldn't this conversation be between the town and the village officials first before convening any kind of committee? I'm hearing ad hoc, and we're the ones that actually vote on this, and we're the ones that are actually going to present this to the community. So I just think it's a little backwards in where we're going.
Well, it depends on who you want to have do the work. I mean,
Right,
if you want the entire town board looking into this, you got the entire town board look into it, where you can kind of have your agents, one member from the town board and one town board one town
I
resident.
just have reservations right now, just
Could
because I don't
I,
want
could
to.
I add something? The goal is to have things done between the village and the town. So if the town is buying water from the village,
Mhm.
so they're providing the service. So the order does not really matter, as long as the job is done. So what they're doing, if we're not engaged, it's okay. They're gonna bring it to table at some point.
Right,
So we just have to wait.
Right,
and-
I agree with you, but the thing is the town, we're paying for a service. What are they doing to maintain their infrastructure? That's one of the questions I want to know, because there have been a lot of water main breaks, and we all have to agree across the country, our infrastructure is failing. And I just want to know in terms of, they have fund balances too, and
They do,
what
and
are
they build
what
them
are
up.
they, what are they
They
investing
build
in
them
the
up.
infrastructure?
They build them up and they apply what they can, but the rates aren't enough
Okay.
to essentially
I just don't know the
replace.
numbers to be
No,
honest.
I'm just saying. I mean, they're not. I mean, the rates aren't enough to basically replace 70%. I mean, we're looking at millions and millions and millions of dollars to replace
Sure.
water infrastructure from 1895. So this is. I think we're just sort of.
And not everyone in the town gets the water from the village.
Yes, exactly. So these are all the things, and I know some folks in the audience have raised some of the issues, like, well, we pay higher rates, but they get a tax break. How does this? So there's all these little individual things that have to get worked out. I mean, the village has 3 dams that need to be replaced because they're on the dam list. The DEC has a list of dams that need to be replaced. And so, for the town, does that mean like much higher rates after they replace it? Maybe, because they have to pass those costs on to the rate
You're probably
user.
going to pay either way. You're
Yeah.
going to pay it in your water bill, or you're going to
Exactly. So there's no free lunch.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay. So
Thanks.
next up, Eagle Scout project, the bridge to Rings Pond gazebo. So this is just a quick little item here. So we had a few Eagle Scouts that approached the town about an Eagle Scout project, and the bridge that goes from basically the park out to the island out there, that needs to be replaced, and we think it might be a nice project for Eagle Scouts to work on if we can kind of work out some details. And what those details are is, one, what type of insurance do they have to be able to work on town property? Who's allowed to use like the different types of power tools? So if you're under a certain age, then maybe it's only the scoutmasters that are using like the drills and the saws and the. So we have some like practical considerations that have to be worked out, which I'm sure we'll have to get. We have some engineering concerns, right? So the engineer is going to be taking a look at it to see exactly what has to be done. Can we use the existing pilings that are in the water, or do we have to replace those? That's not something the scouts could do or should do. If it's just the actual wooden bridge with like the different the slats or whatever and the railings, scouts could do that. So we're going to try to figure out if we can get to a project that they can successfully do and that meets all of the town's standards, but it could be something nice. And I should have more on this in the next couple of weeks. All right, so next up we have an update on the New York Forward grant application. You may have noticed that we had this we had a survey that we put out online. It was on QR codes around town. We had paper surveys. We've really been pushing it pretty hard. We've had close to 300 survey responses. And what we're going to be looking to do is, at the workshop on Thursday night, we basically took all the survey responses and we ranked them by priority projects, just different categories that people ended up choosing, and then the number of responses. And so at the meeting on Thursday night, we're going to have members of the public, we're going to have big wall-sized posters, and people that choose to participate, they're going to each person's going to get a little sticky. And we're going to have people choose their sort of 3 priority areas that they care about. I mean, look, it could be infrastructure, but look, it could also be, look, we also had a few folks that said, hey, we don't want anything. We don't want this, we don't want that, we don't want tourists, we don't want anything. And you know what, that's fine. That's their input and that's what they gave. And so if people come and they want to choose that, they could choose that too. So we pretty much, so basically, and I hope most of the board members can be there. And so, at And after Thursday night, we're going to leave up the posters on the wall in Munger Cottage for Friday and Saturday. So people can also just come in off the street. They can come in and they can just take a sticky and they can, they can vote for what they want to see. And then what happens with this, the grant writer we hired to submit the New York Forward grant application for $4.25 million, they're going to look at all of this, the survey responses. They're also going to look at what people chose via these project nominations. And they're going to include some of that feedback into the grant application because this was part of the process. We actually had to hold this. So New York State said you had to have a robust public input process, and so this is that. And so whatever application goes in is going to reflect. We're not going to choose individual projects because that's not this grant. This grant is basically you tell a story, Cornwall story, which is essentially we have this really walkable, pedestrian-friendly community that cares about the environment, and we want to have walkable downtowns and a walkable Main Street, and we've got to fit projects into that overall vision for Cornwall, and we're just going to talk broadly about projects. If the town is so lucky to be awarded, we won't find out till next year, we then have to put together a local planning committee, and the money comes to the town and the village because it's a joint application, and the local planning committee works with both town and village boards, and we go through the process of what projects we want to choose. And we go through the budget, we go through all of it. There's more community input, but this is a completely community-driven process. This isn't just like we're going to get $4.25 million and then we're just going to go spend it without getting your input, because that's not how this grant works. So Thursday. Okay. Is there any questions on this at all? Okay. All right. So next up, we have authorized a survey for FEMA hazard mitigation project. So, as you're aware, Hurricane Ida hit Cornwall roughly a year ago, and a Continental Road culvert that washed out. That has just been an ongoing saga. At least we're moving forward on that, and it should be installed by the end of the year. The town's also been reimbursed along the way for overtime and other costs that we've had. We've been receiving checks, $40,000, $70,000, reimbursing us for those costs directly from FEMA. The last project that we're still looking to get underway on Continental Road, the high stream flow washed out a portion of the road. And in order to mitigate that, this is kind of like lower down Continental, like as you get closer to the traffic circle. We actually had the New York State Department of Homeland Security and Emergency Services. They're the ones that handled this. They came out and we found a project where we're basically going to put gabion baskets along the creek that would prevent essentially, because eventually the road's just going to fall into the stream if we don't do this, or like portions of it. So in order to finalize the cost of this project, we have to do a survey of that project area. So we have to authorize that, and that's what I'm going to ask you guys to do tonight. So that is that. Next up, we have the Hasbrook Area Drainage Project construction. So just real quick on this, and I actually, I see if I I have. The bad news I have is that the project has. It was somewhere around like of the pipes from like this. We have to route than what was originally proposed. So the good news is that it looks like we're about to get awarded for the FEMA letter tonight and pass a resolution to authorize that. That's the number out today. They told us today that they would only essentially award us up to, of the cost of that project, $500,000. The town's match is 10%, so that's $50,000. we will be finding out by November. Gets us to 2.5. We're still about 2 million short roughly. But the good news is we're probably going to be securing about half the cost of the project, which is good. So then the next step is going to be for the town board to decide whether or not it's going to borrow for the rest, seek additional grants. My personal position is that if we get half the money, we should, the town should come up with the rest of the money and, bond it out and do it. But that's just my public position on that. First found out about this, they had said they would cover 90% of the, based on a cost-benefit analysis, they're only going to give us about $500,000. 500,000, how to come up with the remaining 2.5. Probably in that room over in Kovac, we said that, we would do this project, and if we were able to, we would do it. That's for decades on this event. So town roads.
Okay.
Yeah, it's going to be through town roads. It's going to go down Union and connect with the Main Street sewer line. So no, we don't have to get easements. So at least that's sort of half of the battle. I know there's some folks in the audience. I guess I'll just from Hasbrook Robert. I'm sorry but it's based on a cost-benefit analysis. Let me know now. Reach out to me. Yes, absolutely. And obviously, if we're able to get